Our episode begins with Ikikawa saying that when the kaiju appeared and Kafka told him to run, if Kafka hadn't saved him, he could have died that day. He tells Kafka that he should really think about joining the defense force. Kafka remembers her friend and thanks Ikikawa, saying that he was a really nice guy. Kafka would give the defense force another chance, just like Kafka. You should give the channel a chance. Please subscribe to the channel to help us. But just as he was saying this, a creature said it had found him and entered his body like a worm. When Ikikawa heard the noises, he went to see if Kafka was all right and came across a skeletal creature, but it was still Kafka. We then see Mina saying that whenever Kafka was afraid, she would be by his side. And she starts laughing, saying that Kafka read too much manga and was too cheesy. Kafka got angry, telling her not to dare say that to his mother or her mother, while she burst out laughing. He gets angry because she'll probably tell the whole neighborhood. Mina was grateful, because with the two of them together, she had no reason to feel afraid. Next, we see Mina talking to her team, saying that a kaiju has been spotted in the hospital, and they need to defeat it before it hurts someone. A small kaiju appeared in Yokohama, the ad said. A guy seeing the alert on his cell phone and finding it extremely annoying, wondering if the government couldn't change the sound of that alert. The newspaper urged all residents to go to shelters or lock their doors to do their utmost to stay safe. The old man on the ground saw Kafka in kaiju form and Ikikawa, both three of whom were frightened. Ikikawa thinks it was all a misunderstanding and asks Kafka, who is in kaiju form, to smile, but Kafka's smile doesn't do much good. The old man literally faints at the presence of Kafka in kaiju form. Kafka approaches the old man and touches the wall, but the wall is destroyed with just his touch. Ikikawa and Kafka are very frightened by this, and Kafka doesn't understand, wondering if it was his fault, like he had turned into a kaiju after that creature entered his body. Until other patients come out wondering if it was an explosion and everything was fine, until they see Kafka and wonder if it was a kaiju. Ikikawa tells them to run because the defense force should be here by now. And it could be very bad for Kafka to stay in hospital. He decides to escape through the window, but it doesn't do much good. He just touches and rips out the wall in one fell swoop. A shocked Kafka wonders what the hell is happening to his body until they hear a girl shouting for a doctor. Ikikawa yells at him and Kafka to run. Kafka asks him to wait and jumps too, only his jump isn't human. Mina's team was in the boxcar going in search of the kaiju who was escaping from the South Yokohama General Hospital. He was heading for an evacuated area. Then Ikikawa ran around wondering how it all happened. He didn't understand how Kafka had become a kaiju, and when and how, and he also wondered if he was a real kaiju. Ikikawa asks, just to confirm that he really was Kafka. Kafka says that at that point, even he didn't know any better. And when Ikikawa looked at him, he was getting scarier and scarier. Ikikawa asking if that was a special mode. Kafka says he also wants to know more about it, when suddenly Kafka's tongue simply comes to life and eats a live bird. Ikikawa is shocked, saying that it was a disgusting mess. And out of nowhere, he reverted to his normal kaiju form. Ikikawa says that way of returning to normal was also disgusting. Kafka tells Ikikawa that he's ruined everything. Ikikawa asks if anything else has happened. And Kafka says he wants to pee. Ikikawa gets agitated because he wants to do it right then and asks him to hold it. Kafka says he can't and thinks that the body will end up letting go. He couldn't hold it in. Kafka was a grown man. He didn't want to pee in the street. And Ikikawa wondered where he was going to do it because he couldn't see anything in the place where the urine was supposed to come out. Until they realized that he urinates through his nipple. Kafka was shocked because he realized that no one would want to marry him since he was so weird. Kafka would have preferred to die right there. Ikikawa told him that he had more to worry about and ordered Kafka to stop moping around and get up soon. Kafka was very depressed, asking Ikikawa what was going to happen to him now. He wondered if he could still join the defense force. Ikikawa said it would be impossible because it was Kafka they were defending the people from. They would kill him on sight, and they would kill him well. Kafka realizes that he will never make it into the defense force. He remembers his friend Mina's smile because it all happened just as he decided he was going to catch up with her. How could he do it with that body? Ikukawa calls Kafka and shows him an isolation strip. When they passed, there would be no one left. Kafka looks behind him and sees something coming. He feels it's coming from the ground, and he wonders what that was all about. And suddenly, a gigantic kaiju soared to Earth. Mina's defense force team receives information that there is another kaiju, so Mina asks Car 2 to continue on its way, as they will split up and go to the other location. Kafka says that the kaiju was the same kind that had attacked them before. Ikukawa said that meant they were sending fewer people after Kafka. It was their chance to hide. With any luck, they've already started evacuating when they hear about Kafka. But Ikukawa has faith that there won't be any casualties from the other kaiju. And then they start walking around the place. And then we see a little girl crying out for her mother. Her mother asks the little girl to run away quickly. The girl asked her mother to wait because she was going to save her. She tries to get the debris off her mother, but a kaiju appears and her mother yells at her to run, but the girl doesn't want to give up on her mother. And the kaiju begins to hunt her down while her mother asks her to run away. The kaiju opens its mouth and tries to swallow the child, but Kafka appears and saves the child by punching the kaiju. A punch so hard that the kaiju flies a few meters away. The child is perplexed watching Kafka in his kaiju form. Even Kafka didn't expect him to be so strong. Kafka asks the child if everything is all right. The child gets scared and he apologizes. He tries to smile, but it only makes things worse. He apologizes again to the girl, saying that he's going to disappear and that she could stop crying. Ikukawa appears. Kafka removes the debris from the girl's mother and Ikukawa tries to check on her. She was unconscious but fine. The kaiju return. Kafka asks Ikukawa to get them out of there. Kafka says he'll try to punch them as hard as he can. And he punches the kaiju with all his might, and the kaiju simply explodes with the force of Kafka's punch. Kafka doesn't believe in what he himself has done. He really didn't imagine it. Rain of blood begins to fall from the kaiju's explosion. Ikukawa says that Kafka couldn't aim that at a normal person. Kafka says he's fine and asks the girl to take her mother to the hospital. The defense force was already arriving. He was going to disappear and asks the child to stay calm. Kafka leaves, until the child calls him and thanks him. Kafka remembers his friend Mina thanking him and smiling at him, until he sees his friend and him fighting a kaiju. Ikukawa asked Kafka to leave and that he had called an ambulance. Kafka tells Ikukawa that he won't give up. He needs to stay by his friend's side. Mina arrives at the place where Kafka blew up the kaiju and sees everything dirty with the remains of the kaiju. She doesn't understand what had happened. After all, it was something unprecedented. Mina approaches the child to gather information about the kaiju and tells her not to worry because she will exterminate them all. The child tells her not to hurt the good kaiju. Mina doesn't understand, but the child tells her that the kaiju saved his mother. Mina is shocked to hear this. The newspaper talked about a kaiju number 8 and that the defense force was looking for it. Kafka's co-workers were having a meal and watching the newspaper. The old man who saw Kafka was also on TV giving his testimony. Ikukawa thinks things have gotten out of hand because his friend was the first kaiju to escape from the defense force. It had been 3 months since all that had happened. Every official in the country was looking for Kafka at that moment. A package has arrived for Ikukawa and Kafka, and the supervisor asks Ikukawa to deliver it to Kafka. Ikukawa opens the letter and sees that he has passed the first stage. Ikukawa goes up to Kafka to tell him that he's passed the first stage, but when he sees him, he sees that Kafka is in the form of a kaiju and gives him a volley, one of those really hard ones, asking why he was exposing himself like that. Kafka explains that he still forgets sometimes, but his face comes back, but his teeth don't. Ikukawa warns him that they saw him in the newspaper and he should be careful. Ikikawa and Kafka had returned to the hospital the night of the incident, saying that they had fled when the kaiju appeared. Ikikawa delivers Kafka's letter. Kafka is happy to see it, but not that happy. Ikikawa expected more. Kafka explains that he always gets screwed in the second phase. Ikikawa asks if he would go on to the second phase of tests with that body. Kafka says that no one will find out with the kaiju's teeth showing again. Ikikawa says that in the second phase there will be officers everywhere, and if they find out Kafka is gone, he'll become a ham. Kafka explains that he studied for 3 months and still didn't know how to get back to normal. He was 32 and this was his last chance. Ikikawa says that if the two enter, they would be rivals. Kafka tries to open a bottle of water, and when he pushes it, it turns into kaiju again. Ikikawa tells him not to go to the race, and Kafka keeps hugging Ikikawa's foot, asking him not to leave him. Ikikawa said that the guys were about to arrive and Kafka was supposed to fix his look. Kafka is relieved because if he didn't pass, he wouldn't be able to become Ikikawa's senpai. And then he goes back to work. 10 days later, the second phase of the Defense Force exam would begin at Takekawa Base. Ikikawa and Kafka arrive at the scene. That location was shared with the Defense Force garrison. When something happened, the two sides worked together to send officers to the west side of Tokyo. If Kafka transformed there, he'd be dead in a few seconds. Kafka says there's no point in getting scared, and they're just going to get going. They're a bit early, but they're already going to register. Until a girl calls Kafka an old man, telling Kafka to slow down. Kafka looks on without understanding her calling him an old man. Ikikawa wondered if she was going to take the test too. Kafka approaches the girl saying that he's not old, he's only 32. And the girl says he was an old man. And Kafka stares in shock at Ikikawa. The blonde girl asks if the parked old tin can was Kafka's. She couldn't park and told him to get her out of there. Kafka gets angry that there's a lot of empty space. But the girl continues to say that she wants to leave it parked there, saying that her lucky number that day was 55, which was the space where Kafka's car was. Kafka looks at Ikikawa and asks about his lucky number. And I didn't understand what that brat was about. And Kafka angrily tells her to listen well. The young man he was would teach her to be more polite. The blonde girl answers him by saying, "All right, I'll get the vehicle out myself." And Kafka asks what she's going to do. The blonde girl takes off the top of her overcoat, then grabs Kafka's vehicle and lifts it up with one hand. Leaving Ikikawa and Kafka shocked, she throws the car into parking space 53. Kafka was worried because the car belonged to the firm. Ikikawa asks who that blonde girl was, and she responds by saying that she is candidate number 2016. Her name is Kikaru Shinomiya and her hobby is killing kaiju. Ikikawa thinks about the girl's surname. The girl asks Kafka, calling him an old man, if he knew he smelled of kaiju.